Hello and welcome to another chapter of Talk Books. Today I'm going to talk about Alfred Russel Wallace, and in particular two of his books, the Malay Archipelago and the book called A Life, which is written by Peter Raby, which is a biography of Russel Wallace. A lot has been said about Russel Wallace and the fact that it was him that prompted Darwin to sort of basically get Origin of the Species out and published. Darwin had been working on it for many years, but hadn't actually published, and it was a paper by Russel Wallace that basically Wallace had arrived at the same conclusion for the mechanism of evolution and how evolution works as Darwin had. And it was a letter by him that Darwin received that prompted Darwin to actually move forward on the publication of the Origins. So a lot's been said about that, but from my point of view, he was, as well as being great for that, he was also great for being a scientist, basically. A scientist, a collector, a traveller, an explorer, and that's sort of a fantastic example of that is the Malay Archipelago. And it basically covers his time there between 1854 and 1862. And clearly Malay Archipelago now is what's known as Indonesia. And up until that point, very few, if any, Westerners had been over there. Certainly nothing had been published about it. And this book, from my point of view, still sort of stands up on its own as being not only a great travelogue, but a great nature book, and especially about that area. It really is excellent. It's quite accessible in the fact that it's written in sort of the Shakespearean type English. But it does use quite a lot of English names for some of the birds, some of the species that he saw. So that's really good. And it covers sort of various different parts of the Malay Archipelago and the various different species he saw, but also some of the sort of other humans that he bumped into en route. He covers that in detail as well. It was the book that actually prompted Attenborough, it's a similar type of person really, to go out and do Attenborough in Paradise, about the birds of paradise. And when you read the chapter in here on the birds of paradise, I know it's towards the back somewhere, but if you do read that, you can see why it inspired David Attenborough, because it's really well written, and it really makes you feel like you're there. Some of his descriptions are incredible. So I think if you want to read a really good sort of natural history book and travelogue from a period when there was still loads to discover and loads of discovery happening. This book took him sort of 6 years to write. In fact, he didn't even start it for 6 years. So, and that was basically because he had so many specimens that he collected that he wanted to go through before he actually wrote the book. And he does explain it in sort of the introduction to the book. He explains why he actually took so long in actually producing it. And that was because he did want to sort of go through all the specimens first. And we're talking about, 125,000 specimens that he collected. It's actually nearer, sort of 126,000 specimens that he collected. And that was how it was done in those days. It was all done through sort of collecting. There was no guides that you could look up. There was no museums really. It was all of the things that were collected by people like Wallace that ended up in the museums. But just to give you an idea, he collected 310 specimens of mammal. He collected over 8,000 specimens of birds, and over 13,000 Lepidopterous or moths and butterflies, 80 odd thousand sort of beetles and 13,000 other insects. So, you know, he was an extensive collector, and he collected lots for his own collection because people in them days did have their own collections. But he also collected for museums, and you know, there's still a lot of his collection will be seen in various museums around the world. So the book itself is, you know, it's basically just taken from his 4 journals that he kept while he was actually travelling through the archipelago, and it pulls on that, and it gives you different sort of chapters on each of the various islands that he visited. But then also, as I said earlier, goes into some detail about some of the species. So some of the butterflies have got sort of chapters in their own right that he explains. But certainly, you know, the thing that obviously triggered David Attenborough, and you know, certainly sticks with me, is his descriptions of the birds of paradise, because what we've got to remember is that's probably the first time they were actually seen by any Westerner. You know, so to come across something like that must have been absolutely amazing. So it's a really great book. You know, I really recommend you reading that one. So that's the Malay Archipelago, and that gives you sort of a snapshot of his time there, but only a very small sort of fragment of his life, really, because to get a greater understanding of the man, you need to read A Life by Peter Raby, which is, you know, the biography about Wallace. Because Wallace did a lot more than just visit the Malay. He obviously visited the South America. He did a lot of work around the Amazon with Bates, and you know, that's mentioned in here, that's covered in here. Plus his life, sort of when he got back into, you know, back to the UK, and how he then sort of fit in with the scientific community of the time, because he wasn't of a class that would normally actually just automatically slot into that. He had to work quite hard to get recognition and to actually become, if you like, a member of that scientific elite. And he certainly deserved it when he got there. And you know, this book then does talk about exactly what it says on the cover. You know, this is about his life. This is about what else he achieved in his life. And I think it's the best one I've read about Wallace. It's the best biography I've read about him. So again, you know, if you want to find out about the man, the times, you know, the struggles he had, the sheer exuberance of the man, you know, his drive, because, you know, he suffered from malaria, he suffered from all sorts, but managed to achieve so much, and, you know, put a foundation in for today's sort of scientists, today's natural historians, zoologists, our museums. So well worth getting hold of this book and having a read of it. It'll give you that insight into both his life and the time that he lived. Highly recommended. So I hope you enjoyed that introduction to a couple of Russel Wallace's books. In the next chapter, I'm going to talk about 4 books, but 4 books by the same author. I'm going to talk about Dave Goulson's books. And I'm going to start off talking about the first book I've read of his, which I believe is his first book, which is Sting in the Tail. And I'm going to talk about the other 2 in between, and then I'm going to talk about his latest book, which is The Garden Jungle. For those of you that may have seen the interview that I've done with Dave, he's got a lot to say, but what he's got to say is very interesting and constructive. And his books reflect that. They are, you know, books that I've really enjoyed reading. So what we'll do is we'll talk about that in the next chapter. And if you are enjoying the book reviews and the various other videos I'm putting up for newcomers, and also my interviews, please subscribe to the channel, and then that way you won't miss anything that I happen to put up. Thanks very much.